Yeah, we got.
It's the gavel. Oh, yeah, solid on there.
We're good. We will be on really today. Okay, I will call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone, and I'm not ready. This is our 23rd February PPC meeting. I call it to order. Item number 2 is the PPC minute, meeting minute. Motion for minute.
So moved.
Second. In addition to corrections for minutes. All in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. I did forget the roll call. You did the roll call.
Still roll call. Who do we have from Bullitt County here today? City of Charlestown.
Yes.
Hello, Cody. City of J-Town.
Matt Minier.
Joins Matt. City of Jeffersonville.
Andy Crouch.
Andy Crouch. Thank you for joining us, Andy. City of New Albany.
I'm muted.
Claire.
I'm muted. Hey, thank you.
City of Shively.
Maria Johnson.
Thank you for joining us, Mayor. City of St. Matthews.
Bernie Bowling.
I see Mayor Tonini too. Thank you all both for joining. Clark County.
Brian Dixon.
Brian. Boyd County. NDOT.
Carly Metcalf.
Charlie. Jefferson League of Cities.
Here.
KYTC. Here. Isidro. Louisville Metro Government.
Here.
Got a whole bunch. Who said here? Emily said here. Hi, Emily. In the room, we have Mr. Goen, Ms. George, Ms. Etheridge, Mr. King. That's it. Thank y'all for joining us. Anybody from the Airport Authority? Don't usually have anybody that from there. Oldham County. Town of Clarksville.
Kevin Beatty.
Hi, Kevin. Park.
Carrie Butler.
Who's here? Thank you very much, Carrie, for joining us. Any of our advisory members, FAA, Federal Highway Administration, Tom Hall's here from KYTC. Anybody else from KYTC possibly here? I don't think there is. Blue's here, HUD. We have near perfect attendance today. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yes, sir.
Would you,
Thanks for joining us. Oh. Oh. Certainly, of course.
Okay, sorry to get that out of order, but we do have a quorum. Now moving on then to number 3, the public comment period. Great.
Yes, sir. We do have one public comment that came in prior to meeting today. Okay. Good morning. Range will request funding to increase the timeline and speed at which the one-way streets in rural neighborhoods can be converted into two-way complete streets for the children and elderly without vehicles. In a time of rapidly increasing tourism, often linked to alcohol consumption from bourbon distilleries and breweries, the tourists that come into our neighborhoods using airport rental cars do not understand the ways that our road network is set up. This leads to an increase in accident collisions and side swipes with no legal recourse once the tourists flee the city after 2 or 3 days. With the Preston Corridor plan in full swing, we are asking the State Transportation Cabinet, as well as Metro Public Works and other officials, to connect Preston Highway back across the railroad track using a newly rebuilt pedestrian crossing to replace the old one with over 60 years of deferred maintenance. If this bridge is condemned with no legal way to cross the railroad tracks, any U of L student or resident trying to cross into Shelby Park or into Merriweather neighborhoods are committing a felony by being on the track without a crossing. We are working with over 8 neighborhood associations to find ways to reconnect our east-west connectivity on Oak Street, Kentucky Street, Mary St. Catherine, as well as Breckenridge. We believe that two-way complete streets will not only increase the quality of life across thousands of city residents, but also help protect our children from outdoors. Thank you, Jody Dodd. Let's see, anything in the Q&A? Well, that was all from public comment.
All right, thank you so much, Greg. Item number 4, the public involvement report. Greg, you're against this.
Into the public involvement report real quick for the month of January. Social media analytics, we did see good numbers from Facebook this month, as well as a nice rebound out of Twitter. It was a good sign from December. We're back up over 1,000 impressions, nearly 100 engagements, and Instagram just continues its climb. Every month we seem to get better and better, almost 600 impressions last month, as well as 61 engagements. Other good news was the website analytics also went up. Visitors across from our transportation page to our TIP and MTP all increased compared to last month. We had one public comment opportunity. It was Amendment 10 to CK 2050 in the TIP. Chris will be speaking to that here shortly. We held a virtual public meeting on February 2nd. That was one of our more popular meetings. Thank you to TARC for joining us and being allowed to answer questions about that project. We really appreciate that. We had a lot of good Q&A that came out of that. With that, we did 2 email campaigns. We did one on the day of the campaign for the public comment periods. And we also did one on the day of the meeting, just advertising that. As you see, we saw good numbers out of that, 776 opens on the first one, nearly 800 opens on our one that we did for the public meeting. Social media campaign, we did some paid advertising that led to over 8,500 impressions, really good numbers there, 556 engagements. In all, we had 7 total comments, 8 project likes. They did have a recurring theme. All of them were in favor of it, but they asked for protected, dedicated bike and VRP lanes, as well as curb bump outs and trees. Events this month, last month, excuse me, we went to the Middletown Chamber of Commerce work group, as well as the local metro community engagement work group. Next month, we'll have planned to attend the Middletown Chamber of Commerce Business Expo. That wraps up my report for the month. If there are any questions, I'm glad to take them this time.
Any questions? All right. Okay, we're going to skip 5 and 6 then and move on to 7. And number 7 is a proposed amendment 10 is to the CK 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and fiscal year 2025 Transportation Improvement Program. Chris, you're up.
That PowerPoint.
All right.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Nicholas. Got a PowerPoint, Chris.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So I'm going to be presenting Amendment 10, and it's going to be to the Kentucky Connecting Kentuckiana 2040 MTP and the SIP fiscal year 2020 to 2025. Real quick review or overview, why we have amendments. We have them for new projects and project changes that don't fit the criteria for administrative modifications. They need to be added through amendments. To be considered for an administrative modification, it must be a new project that is not regionally significant and qualify as a group project. Also, many minor changes to existing projects can be added as admin modifications. However, this one's gonna have to fit with the amendments, and it'll be the final amendment to this TIP and MTP. Amendments may take up to 6 months. Administrative modifications can be processed in 30 days. Okay. So what's happening, we have an addition to the TIP, and we have changes happening to the MTP. Some of the changes that are happening, we've got a change in project sponsor. Originally, it was Louisville Metro, and now it's going to be sponsored by TARC. The name has been revised. It's going to be called Broadway All the Way Complete Street now. We've added the state ID, and we've updated the open to public date to 2031. The TIP total cost programmed up to date is 6.25 million. That's a fiscal year 2023 to funding the design phase. It's coming with raise grant funds. That's 5 million federal dollars, 1.25 million other, equaling the 6.25 million total. In case anyone needs to know, a raise grant is a discretionary grant program for investments to surface transportation infrastructure that'll have significant local or regional impact. Raise grants were authorized under the bipartisan infrastructure law. Really quick, the schedule for this amendment. The project applications were due from sponsors on January 23rd. TIPTA staff completed our project review on January 17th. The interagency consultant group coordination looked it over from January 17th to the 24th. And then, as Greg already mentioned, we had our public comment period that was open from January 25th to February 8th. The TTCC made their recommendation on February 8th, and we presented at the meeting. Comments were sent to the TPC to you all on February 9th. And that leads us up to today, where we hopefully will take action. Just real quick, this is the public comment map. The public had a few different ways to make their comments. They could go online and make comments through this map on our website. They could email, they could do regular mail, or they could attend the virtual meeting. And like Greg said, we had pretty good attendance. And unless there are any questions, I am gonna request action to approve Amendment 10.
Okay, any questions? Okay, I need a motion then to approve amendment 10, the modification.
I make a motion to approve amendment number 10 to the Kentucky and 2040 metropolitan plan.
I'll second that.
All right, motion second. Hearing no questions, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Hearing none, motion carried. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you.
All right, looking over to number 8, yeah, NPO dedicated funding call for projects. Nick?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Greg's got a presentation that he's pulling up. So this is obviously a pretty big item. We only do these call for projects every couple of years in Kentucky, on the Kentucky side of the river, and every 4 years in Indiana. This is all about our NPO dedicated funding programs, and essentially we receive funding that is sub-allocated for these programs directly from NDOT and KYTC, thereby giving TPC the authority to award and manage these funds. Perfect. Thanks, Greg. So real quick, there's a lot of information here. I'm going to try to get through as quickly as possible because we do have a ton of items, and I'm not sure if the first 2 items will come back to play or not. But again, these are the 6 programs that we had funding for in the carbon reduction program. We received funds from both Indiana and Kentucky now. Congestion mitigation and air quality program, we received them from Indiana, but not Kentucky. Highway safety program, same thing. We received them from Indiana.
Protect program. That's a new resiliency program that we received a small amount of funding from NDOT for that one. And then both the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program and the Transportation Alternatives Programs, longstanding programs for us that we receive funds from both states. And one quick note, the funds that were available, essentially in Indiana, we made funds available through fiscal year 2029. We had previously programmed out funds through 2025 in both states. So this extends that 4 years in Indiana. In Kentucky, we just made available 2 years worth of funding. The reason why we do that in Indiana is there's not a whole lot of funding and it doesn't go very far when you're trying to stretch $5 million out annually to especially for construction projects that are now $2 and $3 or $4 million. A little more background. We announced this call for projects last summer. The application window was open for about 3 months. Applicants were required to submit the KIPTA project application. That's something that every applicant has to submit anytime you want to include a project in our long-range plan, the MTP, or the short-range programming document, the TIP. If you wanted to also compete for MPO dedicated funds, there's a specific application for that, where we ask questions about complete streets elements, including how folks plan to adhere to the new complete streets policy. That policy was adopted, approved by TPC in October of last year. It requires applicants to include bike, pedestrian, and/or transit modal elements. And if they cannot, there are a list of exemptions to the policy. Sponsors were required to provide a justification as to why this project meets one of those exemptions. And I'll get into those exemptions in a little more detail. Once those project applications were submitted, staff spent a considerable amount of time in November and December reviewing those applications, evaluating them using our new project scoring process. Projects could soar up to 200 points as part of that. We also prepared a ton of documentation, including consolidated project information, the applications that were submitted, cost estimates, and local match documentation, and there was also maps provided for all the projects. We sorted these out into 3 groups of projects. There's the new Indiana MPO projects, MPO dedicated projects. And then in Kentucky, we did have a number of 20-something projects that were submitted that are currently in our MPO dedicated programs that either needed additional transportation alternatives funds, or they were STBG projects that had either been lost had been kind of taken out of the program and are now asking to come back in. And there was also a number that had unfunded future phases. And then finally, there were new Kentucky MPO dedicated projects to consider. Funds, just kind of a quick overview of what was requested. We've had some changes. As you can see, there's some strike throughs on how many projects kind of were applied for and considered. In Indiana, there were originally 11, but 2 have been rescinded, one by Clarksville early on in the process. And then recently, Clark County made us aware that they will not be accepting funds for the Salem Noble Road project that they submitted. So the original requested amount was 24 million. With those 2 taken out, it takes it closer to about 20 million. So we were able to fully fund almost every project except for one. And for the existing Kentucky MPO dedicated projects, there were 25 originally submitted. 1 was rescinded by Louisville Metro. I believe it was the Her Lane project. There was a overlapping project that KYTC submitted. So they pulled that project. So we received about $29 million in requests, and we have about $78 million for both existing projects and new projects in Kentucky. So we have to take that into consideration. On the new Kentucky MPO dedicated projects that were submitted for consideration, we received 29. 1 was rescinded. And there was almost $111 million requested. So obviously we had almost $140 million requested for just $78 million. So it was a very, very tough process. We spent many hours on this. So the group that kind of reviewed all of this information is the TTCC working group. This is a standard process that's outlined in the project management guidebook that TPC approved. Basically, this working group is convened anytime there are more requests for funding than we have available. And so that was the case originally, it was the case in both Indiana and Kentucky. Those standing member agencies of the group are NDOT, KYTC, KIPTA, Louisville Metro, and TARC. The rotating member agencies this go around were Clarksville, Floyd County, Jeffersontown, and Oldham County. There were 2 meetings, met for about 2 hours on the 25th of January and almost 4 hours on the 31st of January. There was a ton of information to consider, including eligibility of both projects and applicants. The Complete Streets policy exemptions were documented and discussed and found to be justified for all 5 of them. I listed the KIPTA IDs up there. There's also a lot of there's a little bit of a shell game that we had to play on the Kentucky side, and because we received a lot more projects that were really just eligible for STBG funds. They might have had a multimodal element, but it was really an STBG focused project. And so I know there's been comments and concerns about moving existing, basically we had to, if the recommendations go as they are, we have to pull some STBG projects that are currently existing in that project program and move them to the other 2 programs, the CRP and TA programs, in order to fit as many projects as we could into the STBG pipeline. So we can talk about that a little more. And then obviously we asked everybody on the working group to rank all these projects, we then took an aggregate ranking of those projects, and then we kind of had another discussion from there. And things moved and shifted depending on conversations that were had. So before I get into this, are there any questions about kind of the lead up to the process before I get into the actual recommendations themselves? Okay. So again, in Indiana, it's important to remember that this is a use it or lose it kind of policy that NDOT has for annual funding. There's no ability to carry over funds if they aren't obligated by the end of the fiscal year. This really complicates things. And sometimes TPC just can't award 100% of the requested funds. So in many cases, a design phase might be funded 75% of the requests. It just kind of depends. We don't have that flexibility like we do in Kentucky. There was one exception that was requested to the Complete Streets policy. That was the Clark County Memphis truck stop project. The improvements to that project, we're seeing it, or the group saw this as a justified exemption since the project wasn't altering the geometric design. Ultimately, this is the one project that's not being recommended for funding. So I can say that the information in the packet, you should have found kind of large tables for each one of the 3 categories. And so you can see the top of the Indiana list was the Clarksville Progress Way Improvements Project. So there are 9 projects that we are considering, and I need to make one change because we didn't learn about that Clark County decision about Salem Noble Road until earlier this week. So on page 4, we are striking the recommended funding for Clark County Salem Noble Road from Highway 62 to Jeffersonville, Charlestown Pike. So the recommendation, I think what we did at TTCC was take kind of one action for the Indiana projects and then a separate action for both the existing and new Kentucky projects. So does anyone, want me to talk more about the Indiana projects? If so, or are there any questions or comments before I ask for action on Indiana specifically?
If there are no question, I'll entertain a motion to accept the Indiana project.
So moved.
Second. Second. No questions, all in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed, like sign? Motion is carried, Nick.
Thank you. And then we'll go back to the presentation and talk about the existing MPO dedicated projects that were submitted by Kentucky project sponsors. There were, I think, 22 projects, something like that. So, again, with the existing projects, we are allowed to carry over funds from one year to the next, and I do, like to take this opportunity to say, to slip and soak when doing that, because Federal Highways, has asked questions in the past about the large carryover balance in both the STBG, specifically in the STBG program. We also have a similar issue with the Transportation Alternatives Program. And so I just want to make it clear that it's not guaranteed that we get to carry these funds over year after year after year. KYTC Central Office does a lot of moving and shaking when it comes to obligation of funds throughout the year to ensure that the state never loses any funds, and we don't have funds that lapse, but that is always a risk. So I do always want to point that out. There were no exemptions to the Complete Streets policy that were requested, and these projects were really grandfathered in anyways, they're existing. But I did want to kind of point out that all of these existing projects include a bike, pedestrian, or transit modal element to them. The recommendation from the TTCC working group was to award $29 million to 24 projects. And with that, it would leave $49 million or approximately $49 million for new Kentucky MPO dedicated projects. Again, starting on pages 6 through 14, pages 6 through 14 of that handout are the existing Kentucky projects. Does anyone have any comments or questions about those recommended awards?
Any questions? You want to take these separate?
We're gonna do, I think, combined as one Kentucky action for the two.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, sir. Okay, moving on to the new projects that were submitted in Kentucky. Obviously, there, like I mentioned, there was a lot of competition for these funds, rightfully so. We did receive 4 projects that submitted an exemption to our Complete Streets policy, and the working group considered those all to be justified. The first being Louisville Metro's downtown Louisville traffic signal upgrades. Obviously, these are just upgrades to a signal, and we have a specific exemption for those types of projects. The LaGrange Road and Whips Mill intersection improvements project is actually the third of 3 improvements in and around that area. 2 of those other projects include multimodal elements. And then the Oldham County Kentucky 22 Clore Lane intersection improvements project. It's a very low spot. It's a spot improvement on a road that will eventually has planned sidewalks on it. But this is obviously just an intersection improvement project here. And there's no existing sidewalks to connect to at this point in time. So they do have plans to acquire that right of way for the future development of sidewalks and or multi-use path. And then there was one for the EV charging infrastructure from Louisville Metro that was also considered justified, as it's obviously just installing new EV charging equipment and not altering the geometric design of the roadway or anything like that. So the recommendation from TTCC was to award $46 million to 21 new projects. By doing so, we would leave about a little less than $1 million available in the CRP program for cost increases, and about $2.5 million in the Transportation Alternatives Program for future cost increases for those projects. We always set aside 20% of every annual allocation of funds for the STBG program. So every year for the foreseeable future has about 20%, $4 to $5 million available for future cost increases. And again, I can get into as much detail as anyone would like in here. But in lieu of just time saving for the rest of the agenda, I'll just open it up. Is there anyone that wants to discuss specific projects? Is there anybody that has comments or questions about these recommendations? I'll be happy to answer any of those.
I, for one, want to make sure and thank the working group for the many hours they put in
Yes.
to do this. It's not easy, and it's following the procedure and the policy guidelines, so it's very nice.
That's right.
For here, no questions, motion to approve.
Motion would be to approve both the existing and the new
Existing
projects.
All the Kentucky projects.
That's right. There you go.
Right. Motion approved.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
Any questions? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? Motion carries. Thank you so much, Drew.
Thank you all.
Next two. All right, number 9, performance management plan annual update. Jeremy, you're up.
Good afternoon. This presentation is the same as the one given to T2CC a couple weeks ago. I'll just for condense presentation, the slides are the same. So this is FHWA safety performance measures or PM1. These are required to be reported on annually. I'll go over briefly what the PMP is. We'll look at 22 crash data. We'll look at the required safety baselines and targets, Q&A, and then sure is requested. So the PMP consists of many things. Part of what I do is for this one is the safety measures. PM1. PM2 is more infrastructure like bridge and pavement condition. PM3 looks at air quality. The CMAQ performance plan was created and approved last August. We also have TIPTA performance measures, and this document will be updated later this year. So here's an overlook of the past years of safety performance measures, 2022. As you can see, in 2020, any of the safety measures went up. Last year, most things were up, fatalities. So these are the 5 measures that were required to report on: fatalities, fatality rate, which the rates, fatality rates and serious injury rates are PMP based, or vehicle miles traveled. We have member serious injuries and non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries, which include bike ped and other non-motorized, such as like horse and buggy, which typically don't have, because we didn't have any last year in the past. So here's the fatalities for the region broken out by counties. As you can see, Jefferson is down a little bit. As I previously noted, the region, this measure is still elevated from previous years. Serious injuries was a little down last year, which is good. I will point out that the serious injury rate, which is VMT based for Indiana at least, the VMT was, as reported, it was a little low, so that actually increases the serious injury rate.
Might be worth noting, we have serious doubts about some of the VMT from Indiana on account of it may not be that low in reality, right? There's no, I don't think us driving around southern Indiana shows that it's a lot fewer VMT. All signs point to it being similar to the past years, if not higher. So it's a little bit questionable in that data.
So yeah, that's what we have to use for these rates, and as shown in the first graph, you can see how it affects that. Here's our non-motorized and serious injuries, fatalities. We want to make sure we're using any and all available funding to focus on these safety issues.
May I, excuse me, may I ask a question?
Sure, please.
On these, I'm I would assume that there has been some level of like deep dive into this to see where the fatalities happen. Were they at intersections or mid-block crossings? Or I don't need that answer, but I just wanted to sort of ask that if somebody is looking at sort of the specific location of these on the roadway.
So the data that I pull and that's used here, that's just pulled from all the counties. It's not, like, nothing has been drilled down into, that's typically up to like the local agencies.
Fair point. It's not, KIPTA's reporting the total numbers, not the
Also,
specific.
these are just like the federal reporting requirements. So anything outside of this, like specific locations, that would be like hotspots, that'd be for.
The results of agenda item 11, however.
I'll stay
will
tuned
take
then.
as deep a dive as ever been taken.
Okay, then I'll save it for 11. We teed that up to tease agenda item 11. Keep everybody going.
Stay tuned. Okay, next we'll look at targets and baselines. So these are the, this is what's required to be reported to FHWA. Here's a time series of the past years. You can see the baseline in yellow and target in green. Keep in mind, as you look at the baselines and targets, that 4 years of data is in the past, and we're only projecting out 1 year. So it's not something aspirational, like as far as setting a target. If you want to look at that, we do, sort of set more aspirational targets in 2P, but as you look at these, these are like set procedures on how to do baseline and targets. Tally rate, serious injuries trending down. Also the rate. And the biped and level off, but still, much too high. These, here's the summary. These numbers were, like I said, presented a couple weeks ago to the TTCC, and they recommended for approval these baselines and targets. There are any other questions? Happy to take those. Otherwise, action is requested.
Okay, any questions?
I would like to make a comment that I make each year, and I appreciate you bringing up the rolling 4 year and that it's a set procedure for the target, but I will make my comment. I think the target for fatalities should never increase. I understand why it's set that way, but maybe it can't be 0, but it should never increase. That's fine. I understand why we set it that way, but I'll just make that comment. And maybe it's for FHWA to hear.
I think what might serve us best if they change the way that NPOs and states are required to calculate it, and maybe even call it something else other than a target.
Yes.
Call it a something. I don't even know what the word would be. I'm not
A
good
rate
with
of report or something.
Yeah, because it's there's no room for aspirational nature. To take it to the extreme, if we're increasing at such a steep slope, if we had 0 fatalities in a year, it's still possible that the 5 years could go up. And that's crazy. It's not that extreme, but taken to the extreme, it could play out that way. The math could play out that way. And so it is, we share that frustration. Crystal clear.
But I will make a motion to approve these targets. Thank you for your work on that.
Do we have a second?
Second, Bernie.
Bernie, any other questions, anyone? All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you so much. Thanks, David. Let's back up. I did find out that this, the gentleman that was coming to talk about Amtrak can't make it today, but we do need to look at agenda number 6, and it's the FRA Corridor Identification Development Program Grant. Andy?
Yes, sir. So I will, share screen. So Derek James from Amtrak. Derek James is a government affairs person from Amtrak. He was scheduled to be here today, or so we thought. He had apparently on his calendar to be here on March 23rd. So, things one, March 23rd does indeed happen to be our next scheduled meeting. So if we would like to invite him back, I'm very open to inviting him back. Secondly, I am going to try to share my screen if I can. And I will try to do it 5 minutes of justice when he's gonna show us. That's okay. All right, I'll try to make it 3. So Greg, I'm gonna show you here. All right, so what he was gonna tell us was a follow-up on the conversation we started last month, right? That Amtrak and FRA have made a tremendous amount of money available for communities, for regions, for states to pursue passenger rail where it no longer exists, where it exists, but it's not a high-quality service that people utilize. And potentially, I suppose, new service, but the priorities are on those first 2 things, where it used to go or where it goes, but not well. So for those online, I searched Amtrak connectsus.com. And if you get to that website, okay, so let me see. So they've got maps on their website. So I've seen Derek's presentation. Mike King's seen Derek's presentation a couple times, and others in the room perhaps have as well. And I mentioned this last time too. It's not KIPTA necessarily or Louisville Metro saying, hey, passenger rail, we want it to return. Amtrak said that they'd like to come back to Louisville on some level. They put this map out. We didn't put this map out. There's been some expression of interest, but this map exists before we expressed any interest at all, okay? So in other words, this light blue line here connecting Chicago down to Louisville is the former route of I think it was called the Kentucky Cardinal, which quit operating in or around 2003 or so, okay? So if you click on that train right there on AmtrakConnexus.com, you'll get to this this screen that you just saw that I was just on. All right, I wasn't ready to share my screen, but I am now. Very importantly on this, you find some good information here. So I mentioned this last time, but what they envision is a high quality service connecting Chicago to Louisville, that middle line, 5 hours and 45 minutes. I think last time, 20 years ago, it took 10 hours or something like that, okay? So high quality service, 8 trains a day, round trips, leaving Chicago to get to Indianapolis. Once it gets to Indianapolis, 4 would go to Louisville, 4 would go to Cincinnati. So it kind of split off half and half. That's Amtrak's proposal. That's nothing to do with KIPTA, nothing to do with Louisville Metro, nothing to do with anybody around here. That's what Amtrak has proposed. Importantly, the Louisville to Indianapolis line would be on the Illinois Railroad, Louisville, Indiana Railroad, or it doesn't have to be. That's the railroad that it used to be on. That's the railroad that connects our 2 cities. That's the railroad it would likely be on. They go on to talk about the benefits. So I'll maybe leave it there if you don't mind. And if there's any discussion, we'll talk about it. But if you don't mind, can we move to agenda item 6, which is maybe a follow-up to this, important follow-up to what Derek's presentation. I was going to follow up his presentation with a request of this meeting.
Number 6, yes.
So agenda item 6 on your agenda is an interesting opportunity, a great opportunity in my view. I think others in the room share that idea. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to stop sharing. The Federal Railroad Administration, not Amtrak, but Federal Railroad Administration has made a significant amount of money available to follow through on some of Amtrak's proposals, perhaps. Specifically, it's through their Corridor ID and Development Program. What the Corridor ID and Development Program is, it's one of the many discretionary grants in the new infrastructure bill. And the Corridor ID and Development Program, we call it the Corridor ID Program, makes available up to $500,000 of no local match money, 100% federally funded, to pursue, in essence, a viability grant. Is that fair to say, Mike or John? A viability grant to say, let's look at Louisville, Indianapolis. Let's look perhaps other places in the future, but Louisville, Indianapolis. What would it cost? What would it cost to serve it as well as it needs to be served? What would need to be done? Capital, schedule, cooperation with railroads, among other things. There's a lot of answers. State support. State support is somewhere on that list too. None of these passenger rail services that exist are profitable. Not any of them, to my knowledge. The Northeast Corridor is pretty close, as I understand, but the ones elsewhere in the U.S. are not profitable, and so those are propped up. Those are supported, subsidized, whatever word you want to use, through the state DOTs. So it'd be worked with NDOT too. So what's in the works right now, that Corridor ID grant program is an application is likely to be pursued and with this body's approval, KIPTA's name would be on that grant. That grant would be in partnership with our friends at Louisville Metro. That grant would be in partnership with Louisville Metro's consultants, AECom, Indianapolis MPO, NDOT some of these folks probably their name wouldn't be on the grant, but rather they'd be supportive of the grant. We know that they've expressed their support. And very importantly, to get that, the map I showed earlier, Louisville to Chicago, NDOT is pursuing the same grant, okay? NDOT is pursuing the grant from Indianapolis to Chicago. I mentioned last time that they were sending out signals that was their number one priority. Their number two priority was Louisville to Indianapolis, okay? And so NDOT is going to pursue the northern half, and we're going to support them in that, or we plan to support them in that. It's up to somebody else to fill that other void. Now that somebody else is going to be a partnership of a collection of us around this area, in conjunction with Indianapolis again, and others. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. Mike King from Louisville Metro and John Callahan from Louisville Metro's consultants are in the room. If anybody has any questions of them, they know as much or much more about it than I do. But the request being made today is to seek this body's approval to go ahead and pursue that grant. That grant that it's due by mid-March, if I'm not mistaken. March 27th, so late March. And it's simply for requesting permission for KIPTA staff to pursue that grant.
Any questions? Gentlemen, anything you want to add to the presentation?
Andy summarized it pretty well. I will say that we as Louisville looked at a few other connections down into Tennessee and into Ohio as well. But there wasn't a lot of reciprocated interest for multiple reasons at the time. Indiana was a very willing partner in this, so that's why we thought this is priority number one for us at this moment.
Good. But if KIPTA's part of the grant, who would actually take the lead in filling out the forms or pursuing the grant?
All signs point to Metro and their consultants.
The way we're gonna do it is Metro would do the heavy lifting. And by Metro, I mean John and his team is gonna do a lot of the heavy lifting, but we're going to help with that process. But we thought it made more sense for KIPTA to be the actual name on the application because they had that bi-state jurisdiction, whereas Metro only sees the one side of the river. It made more sense for KIPTA to be the official lead. The Metro, I think, will be leading the effort kind of behind, doing a little of the heavy lifting.
Makes sense. Any questions? Who wants to make the motion for KIPTA to be named on that grant?
So moved.
We got all kinds of agreements with that. Do I get a second? Second. Okay, we have a second. Any questions? If not, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Good deal.
If I might, would you all like for me to invite Mr. James to attend our March meeting?
I think so.
We'll do. Thank you.
I've seen no negative. Item number 10, air quality conformity analysis. Andy?
I'll handle this one. So one of the very last building blocks of our update to our long-range transportation plan, otherwise known as Connecting Kentuckiana 2050, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, is the regional air quality analysis, regional emissions analysis. That's a critical step each time we amend or update our MTP. And I am here to present the results from that analysis. I guess I'll first start with a little background, kind of like Jeremy did, just kind of set the table. This is one of my favorite graphs that we have in our MTP in the past, and it's going to be in our new one. This data is from Louisville Metro APCD, our Pollution Control District. And what this shows, the points and the lines, the jagged line, that shows our what's known as our ozone design value. Okay, design value is another way of saying what the air quality monitors have the results of the air quality monitors that are stationed region-wide. So what you can see on this graph, you can see that those points, those dots, those connected dots, it's in a long-term downward trend, indicating that, in fact, that the air quality is indeed getting better, right? So right now, you can see in 2021, the number says 0.069 parts per million. That's our design value for the 3-year period, 2019 to 2021. Okay, so those blue, what's the blue, the green, and the peach rectangles there? Those are representative of the National Air Quality, Ambient Air Quality Standards, okay? So you can see that from, on this graph, at least from 2001 through 2008 or so, the standard was 0.08. Then it stair stepped down to the green, which was 0.075. And then now our current standard, the 2015 ozone standard, is now 0.70. Okay, so we've always, as you can tell, those points are near the top of those rectangles, therefore indicating that's always been a borderline situation for us in our region. So again, I like this graph just because it shows that while we were considered non-attainment, now that we're below that line, we're considered in the works of being maintenance. I believe the two states have differing tracks. And so I believe you could kind of say we're maintenance in Indiana, non-attainment still in Kentucky, if I'm not mistaken, but nonetheless on track to be maintenance. That's the same, that's where you go after you are non-attainment. 2022 numbers, you may wonder. We had an okay year last year in 2022. Okay, so the design value is a 3-year average. All signs point to us coming just right at the right number. So we're going to be just fine, but just by a hair. Thankfully, you can, a math term from middle school, truncate. Remember what truncate means? You can truncate your 3-year values. So we are 70.667. Okay, the standard is 70. And so looks like we're good for another year. So how about that? Now, for what we do here at KIPTA, we basically have to compare our regional emissions to budgets that are set, not necessarily exactly to do with those standards, but based on those standards, you could say. And so that process took place about a year ago. This is our MTP update. This is our second time we're going to be comparing to new budgets. Our last amendment, Amendment 9, if I'm not mistaken, was compared to the budgets for the first time. So this is the second time we've used those budgets. But most importantly, with this comparison, this includes all of the feedback, or excuse me, all the inputs to our long-range plan. Okay, so that includes new estimates of future household growth, population growth, employment growth, thus new estimates of emissions in our regional travel demand model. Our output of that travel demand model gets used as input into Louisville Metro APCD's MOVES model. MOVES model is the model that EPA requires agencies to make these comparisons with, and then that output is here on the screen. So, cut to the chase, we do pass in all 5 of those scenarios. Those are the 5 model scenarios we would have in our new analysis. So every time we amend the MTP in the coming years, we will use these same years. We would compare to these budgets. Those budgets are listed there on the bottom. What's important to note here, any year before the year 2035, so in this case 2025 and 2030, is compared by rule to the baseline emissions. Those baseline emissions were for the year 2019. So in other words, as long as our 2025 and 2030 scenarios emissions are not estimated to be greater than 2019's emissions, we're in good shape on those years. The budget was established for the year 2035, okay? So any year that's 2035 or later, on this screen is 2035, 2040, and 2050. Those are our scenarios that we've pursued. Any of those years must be, fall, the emissions, estimated emissions are required to fall below that budget. So that budget gets real tight. That budget for NOx, oxides of nitrogen, and VOCs are listed down there in the very bottom, those bottom 2 lines. You can see how, let's go to the very bottom line. The estimates for NOx must be below the budget of 17.18 tons per day, or 15,000 kilograms per day. So the bottom 2, 2040 and 2050, when we look up NOx, we see it's around that 15 or 14,000. So we pass. Little margin error, little margin of safety, I should say, but not a lot. And that's partially by design in the budget setting process. That's all I have on this. If you have to answer any questions, I can call for days on this. But the action being requested today is to accept this as, well, frankly, the last building block of the long-range plan update, which we plan to bring to the TPC next month. This is the very last, this is, years in the making. This is the very last building block, many of which you all approved over the last several years even. This is probably the very last one, last building block of that. So be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions? So this, we need a motion to approve this update, CMPD.
Yes, sir.
So moved.
Second. Motion.
Second, Bernie.
Motion second. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? Motion carried. Thanks, Andy. Item number 11, the streets, safe streets for all grant update. Alex, we already know you got one question.
Fabled item 11, is very nicely teed up. We have safety standards, but they come out for the entire region. We don't really, at this point on a regional level, slice and dice that down to see where the problem is. That is fortunately about to change. You all, I think, are familiar with the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program that we applied for over the summer. We received word a couple weeks ago that we were awarded an action planning grant. So what I want to do today is just quickly review what that is and then give a little sense of what's coming up. Andy, I believe we need to ask for approval here as well as the KIPTA board for the RFQ.
Yes, so this is, yes, that's correct. The reason is, one of the reasons that it's both is because this is not just a 5-county urban MPO grant, it's a 9-county KIPTA at large grant. So there are more agencies than those represented in this room that would be partners.
So we actually be requested to, for us to accept.
Yes, that'd be appropriate, and then we'll follow up with the board to cover our rural counties. And
So there'll be ask for action at the end. So big picture, we received a $600,000 grant from USDOT that will be paired with the $150,000 local match that participating jurisdictions committed to over the summer based on a population-based formula. We are one of 473 coalitions nationwide that did receive the grant. 37 of those received implementation grants, including our friends at Global Metro. Overview of these two types of grants. The action planning grants are for basically developing or adding to a comprehensive safety action plan to address serious injuries and fatalities and see ideally a vision zero elimination, but at the very least measurable reductions. And then number two, implementation grants, which are about implementing said action plans. To receive an implementation grant, you must first have an eligible action plan, which is the primary reason that we had come to this body in the summer recommending this approach. As we move forward, we have three primary goals from this process. Number one, a well-defined holistic strategy to reduce roadway deaths and serious injuries from crashes, relying on both historical data as well as a systemic approach and modeling. Number two, want to position the region to make sure we actually are able to get an implementation grant moving forward. And then number three, because we've got both a regional focus to this, but also a local focus to this, where the local jurisdictions are the ones really putting up the local match. We want to make sure that every participating jurisdiction also has the building blocks, at the very least, for a local action plan that can be used separately to apply for an implementation grant. Quick reminder in our participating jurisdictions, we have Clark and Floyd counties in Indiana, Charleston, Clarksville, Jeffersonville as well. In Kentucky, we have, we talked about the rural ad counties that are technically outside of the MPO, but still part of the KIPTA jurisdiction. We also have Bullitt and Oldham County. And then Louisville Metro was very generous in participating with this, even though they're moving forward with an implementation grant. They are going to be partners on this effort and have contributed $100,000 towards the match, for which we are all very grateful. In addition, Jeffersontown, Mount Washington, Shepherdsville, and St. Matthews are all participating jurisdictions here. Moving forward, and this timeline is still perhaps a little bit aspirational. So this is what we are shooting for, and we'll be updating as any of this does change. But we're hoping to get approval to move forward with the RFQ, which is in development today. We would like to actually release that around mid-March. Shortly before that, reconvene our steering committee. For those of you who were in the November meeting that we had, that is what we're considering the steering committee. That's a representative from each participating jurisdiction. Our rough timeline is to have that RFQ out there for about a month, and then come back for discussion with our selection committee, we're still working out the details of who would be on that. It would be representatives likely of KIPTA as well as the steering committee, potentially a few others. Shoot for mid-May to actually get into the award. And then a late June kickoff date for the project itself. We anticipate, and we're told this is also ambitious, but we think it is doable, that the process itself, once we kick off, would be about a year-long planning process. We think it's important to keep it to a year and not go beyond that because, as you saw, there are 472 other jurisdictions that also received an action plan grant. So all of those folks are going to be competing with us for funding. The sooner we can get this finished and get that implementation grant out there, the better our chances are going to be. The one thing that is outside of our control on this is we cannot move forward until we have a grant agreement from USDOT. And USDOT has not yet said exactly how long that process will take and what we should expect. Obviously, Louisville Metro has had experience with that recently in terms of that potentially stretching on through no fault of our local control. We do have a meeting for all action plan awardees next week. We're anticipating hearing a little bit more. So certainly by the March TBC and hopefully by TTCC, we'll have a little more to update folks on. Just to close out, just a quick summary of sort of what we think actually will need to be in this action plan. Really trying to set expectations so everybody has a sense of this. We developed this from the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity that the feds had put out for the first round of Safe Streets. And in that, they said, if you've got an existing action plan and you want to be eligible for implementation funding, you need to have these things. So at this point, our assumption is we're going to be looking at a very similar set of criteria, and that's really what we're thinking of structuring it around right now. So right there, you have the must-haves. So biggest piece is just the data, getting all that data, doing the analysis, slicing and dicing it. So you're looking at intersections, corridors, really getting a broad view of what the issues are and where the issues are. And doing that in both based on the historic data as well as modeling the systemic approach for what roadways are potentially dangerous and what we can do about that. Number two, a comprehensive set of projects and strategies to actually address what your data has said is a problem. And then for us, not so much for DOT, but for us, obviously having that region-wide plan and then that sub-plans for jurisdictions is going to be an incredibly important piece. They then said there were a bunch of other items and they recommended having at least 4 of the following 6. Some of these are fairly simple. Public leadership commitment, that would be as simple as the TPC in a formal resolution saying, you know, we support the Vision Zero approach and the specific date for achieving targets. Task force that's empowered to oversee that process moving forward, public engagement, and actually taking that public engagement and incorporating it into the recommendations. Certainly an equity focus and consideration around your planning process, around your data, and around your analysis. An assessment of current region-wide and local policies and plans and recommendations around what should be updated. And then finally, clear measurements for what you're going to define as success and what those timelines are for accountability moving forward. That is all I have. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. And as we said before, we do request action approving that RFQ.
All right. Any questions? Motion to create an RFQ.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, good deal. If there's no questions, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? You're busy, looks like.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 12, the administrative modification 42 of the fiscal year 2025. You have a next.
That's right. This is-
Congratulations, thank you.
Yes, appreciate it. This is not an action item. This is for information only. Administrative modifications are always for informational purposes only. These are typically minor changes to existing projects or adding new projects that fit our group project thresholds. Administrative modification 42 is pretty brief. First project is Clark County Bridge improvement project. There was some back and forth between NDOT and Clark County on that
what the description should look like. So we flipped it back. You may have seen this project in Admin Mod 41 when we changed the description the first time. So it's going back to its original description. The next three projects or 4 projects on here. Basically, these are MPO dedicated funds. So back in, I believe it was October, brought some cost increases for Indiana project sponsors to you all. Those were the Floyd County Charlestown Road Complete Streets Corridor, Clarksville's Blackiston Mill Road Phase 2, and New Albany's East Main Street Reconstruction Project. They had all received additional funds that we had left over. We also had a contingency action as part of that TPC approval, that if additional funds had become available, we would award those in proportion to the 3 projects because we weren't able to fully fund them in the first place. So Clark County, with their Stacy Road roundabout, has realized they do not need $700,000 in utilities funds that they originally thought they might, while working with Duke Energy. So we're taking those $700,000 away from that project and awarding them to those 3 projects that I mentioned for Floyd County, Clarksville, and New Albany. That is all I have on that item. Any questions or comments?
Nick, question. Project for the I-64 will be included on this one?
That one will not be included on 42. KYTC did submit a project to revise I-64 project that will be included in Admin Mod 43, which Chris is working on. And I think she plans to have that done by the March 2nd deadline that you guys have in place.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? There's no action report.
No, sir.
Okay, good deal. Thanks, Nick.
Yep.
Item number 13, this is a grant for the fiscal year of 2023 through 2026. I think, Nick, you still here?
I'm here. Not going anywhere now. For about 24 hours. So this is so we sent out basically a draft project listing. This wasn't the entire TIP document, but we wanted to send out and reflect that we had, the 300 plus projects that are going to be in the new fiscal year 23 to 26 transportation improvement program. So those were sent out, included in that link. Obviously, we didn't want to print that many pages out, but all the details are in there. There have been a couple changes here and there over the last month that we're incorporating into the final document. And like Alex mentioned, and I think Andy as well, we're hoping to bring that back to you all in a month so we can go out to the public for comments on the new TIP. Any questions or comments about the new TIP document, the project listings themselves? Yes, Tom.
I was curious about the SLO funded projects that were awarded today and other projects dedicated projects. Will they only show up in the new TIP or will they be amended and administratively modified into the current?
The process right now, those projects have all been included in this project listings for the new TIP. So we've already got that all included. So when we should have this approved by June or July. So those projects can then move forward at that time. I don't think we plan to do a large administrative modification to make all those changes to the existing TIP since we're about to come out with a new one.
If a project sponsor wanted to move aggressively on a fiscal 2023 project, is that something that the MPO would consider? Because
Yes, I think so.
I think, yeah, so probably have to draw the line at an admin mod.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, the one Cedro was just mentioning, that admin mod is gonna have, I think we got 2 projects right now, might be one more coming. What we're gonna have to do, now that we're past the point of no return on our updates, is to do those actions twice, right? Admin mod the current TIP. And then potentially in that project's case, the KYTC project's I-64 project, it had some changes already in the works in the new TIP. And now there's a different change. And so we're gonna have to admin mod 1 of the new TIP will be coming soon.
Yeah.
So similar changes.
So if a project fits our group project thresholds and can be added to the TIP, then I think there's probably no issue doing that. So I know you guys have a couple planning studies. Those would definitely fit the group project criteria. But most projects probably would not because they exceed $1 or $2 million outside of, I don't think we funded a lot of maintenance projects as part of the call, but planning studies, things that fit the group projects threshold could be added immediately.
Thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions? We do need action here to.
No, sir. No, sir. Just a heads up on the projects that we included.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Okay, all right. Thanks, Ed.
Bet.
Item number 14, Andy, the MPO director's report.
So many times at these meetings, it's always other business. I always have a lot of things, or sometimes I have a couple of things, so I just added this agenda item just so everybody doesn't leave when I start talking. Couple items that are related, you didn't know, or you didn't get the innuendo that Nick was talking about there. This is Nick Vale's last TPC meeting. Last TPC meeting, I should say, as a KIPTA staff person. Perhaps we will see him again. Very likely we will see him again. I want to recognize Nick in front of this buddy. I know that each and every one of you all probably interacted with him numerous times, and if you haven't, the staff of your agency certainly has in his leadership of our TIP and coordination of our TIP for many years now. So I want to express our thanks to Nick here today. Appreciate it. Yeah, well, I'm good. Let's say, can he go or can he stay? Actually, be careful what you say to him, because, yeah, exactly, because, yeah, I'll be taking a job with the Federal Highway Administration, Kentucky Division, and probably, I think, more than likely, be the kind of oversight personnel for MPOs across the state. So I will probably be here quite a bit.
So we need to still like you.
Right. Yeah. Don't turn on the way. Don't turn too quick. Yeah. The only other thing I had was just to note that that brings our open positions in the transportation division of the other two. You'll remember Valerie Morse, who left a couple months or so ago. We've had several interviews for that position, so still no formal job offers there. Nick's job is posted now or very, very soon, today perhaps. So we'll be looking to fill that one with some pretty immediate need. Obviously, very important.
Who'll be picking up next slide?
So for the time being, that's a great question. Thanks for probably address all emails to myself or to Miss Chris Nicholas. We'll be doing our best that we can to fill those giant shoes. Because the beat must go on, not only on the update, but to the everyday administration of the TIP. That stuff never ends, as most of you all know. So I appreciate your patience with me and Nick, me and Chris over the next few weeks. So it'll be a learning experience perhaps for a little bit for all of us, because as you all probably also know, our TIP's been in very good hands for many, many years through Nick's tenure here at KIPTA and through Mary Lou Hallberg, who preceded him and mentioned that TIP. So it's going to be a new day, a new TIP day. That's all I have for that.
There's no other business. Item number 16, that motion to adjourn.
All right.
Motion, second.
Second.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.